At 11,000 feet the sky looked empty, but it was not empty at all. Ukraine and Russia were sharing the same thin corridor of air separated by minutes, meters, and intent. This was supposed to be routine, a patrol line flown so many times that checklists became muscle memory, yet routine is where modern air wars hide because nothing announces itself until it is already too close. The pilots knew that silence could be louder than alarms. And that distance collapsed quickly when jets closed head-on over contested water beneath indifferent clouds that refused to witness history unfolding. From the west, a Ukrainian fighter held altitude sensors, quiet radar disciplined, and weapons cold. From the east, a Russian jet mirrored the profile, speed matched, angles clean, both crews trusting training and rules that had thinned under pressure. The moment mattered not because missiles flew, but because they did not, and restraint in the air has a physics of its own, every calculation compressed into seconds, fuel burn vectors, wind shear, and the memory of other days when a single tone changed lives. Below them shipping lanes glittered oblivious, while command rooms waited for symbols to flicker or fade, and history balanced on geometry, patience, and trust that doctrine still meant something in a sky stretched thin tonight only. Both sides had reasons to be there and reasons to pretend they were not. Intelligence had whispered of probes, tests, quiet questions asked with aluminum and kerosene. Ukraine needed to show presence, Russia needed to show reach. Neither wanted the answer that came with a spark. Control passed through layers, screens, voices, codes that softened decisions until they could be lived with. Pilots watched the horizon, not each other, knowing the smallest turn would be read as a sentence. Radio silence held. Because words invite mistakes, and mistakes invite momentum, which is hard to stop once it begins. The jet slid past on offset tracks, close enough to feel the other engine through the air, an encounter measured in restraint rather than distance or speed that would be studied later, frame by frame, in quiet rooms far away after dawn. When the separation opened, the sky exhaled. Crews reported neutral outcomes, phrases chosen carefully so they could survive scrutiny, yet the significance lingered because each near meeting redraws the invisible map of what comes next. Analysts would later note the altitude, the headings, the timing, how restraint signaled boundaries without surrender. For viewers it would be a headline, but for those inside cockpits it was a calculation paid in breath and discipline. The air remembers these moments, carrying them forward into the next patrol, the next decision, the next thin margin where choice matters more than hardware ever will, and silence becomes a tool as sharp as steel in the thin blue above. Conflict shared briefly by rivals that night. This encounter did not end the war, nor did it promise peace. It showed something rarer, a pause held by skill, doctrine, and nerves. The world below kept moving unaware, while at 11,000 feet lines were drawn without ink. Tomorrow there would be sorties, losses, gains, arguments, and maps updated again. Tonight there was only the knowledge that restraint had waited. It is easy to miss these moments because nothing explodes, but they shape outcomes as surely as fire. The pilots returned to base, carrying a story they would never tell fully, and the sky closed behind them, keeping its secrets intact for now until another meeting arrives at altitude where choices echo far beyond sight and time waits. Hours earlier the chain had already begun to tighten, long before metal crossed paths at altitude, because modern air encounters are decided as much by what happens on the ground as by what happens in the sky. Radar crews watched patterns, not aircraft. Intelligence officers watched behavior, not maps, and both sides measured intent through repetition. Ukraine had noticed subtle changes, Russian patrols holding lanes a few seconds longer, climbing a few hundred feet higher, lingering where they used to pass through. Russia noticed the same from the other side, each adjustment small enough to deny yet large enough to signal awareness. This is how escalation starts, quietly, not with threats, but with geometry rewritten one flight at a time. Inside Ukrainian command, the decision was framed as risk management, not bravado. Presence had to be shown without providing a pretext, and pilots were briefed with a single emphasis: discipline. Every system would operate under a mission control, no radar sweeps, no active targeting, no unnecessary radio traffic. The jet would fly clean, trusting passive sensors and eyesight. The goal was not to challenge, but to confirm that access still existed, that the corridor had not closed in practice, even if it was contested in rhetoric. For Russia the objective ran parallel but opposite: demonstrate reach, normalize proximity, and collect reactions without crossing the invisible line that would force a response. Both sides knew the other knew. This symmetry created a dangerous calm. As the fighters approached the shared airspace, the margin for misinterpretation shrank. Wind and cloud layers distorted perception, closing distances faster than instruments suggested. At this stage human factors dominate: breathing patterns, grip pressure, micro corrections, and stick and throttle. Pilots are trained for chaos, but these moments are quieter, more stressful, because nothing external compels action. Every move is voluntary and therefore carries intent. When the opposing jet came into view, the brain performed calculations faster than language: speed, rate, closure, angle of pass. A slight bank could read as aggression, a delayed correction as hesitation. Each pilot held steady, trusting that the other would do the same, a mutual test of professionalism under scrutiny. Below them unseen systems were awake passive receivers listened for emissions electronic warfare units waited to respond if silence broke missile crews tracked, but did not lock because a lock is a statement and statements can escalate quickly. This layered restraint is fragile. It depends on trust that the other side values control over advantage at least in that moment. The jets passed within visual range close enough to register markings and canopy reflections close enough to humanize the threat, which paradoxically reduces the likelihood of rash action. Seeing a pilot rather than a target tempers instinct. The encounter lasted seconds, but those seconds carried hours of preparation and years of doctrine behind them. After separation, the real work began. Data was logged, timelines reconstructed, voice channels reviewed for deviations. None were found, which itself became information. Analysts compared this past to previous ones, noting consistency and deviation, looking for drift that might predict future risk in both capitals. Reports emphasized professionalism, restrained adherence to rules. Each statement was accurate and incomplete because the true message lived between lines. The sky had been shared without incident, meaning the boundary held for now, but boundaries under pressure erode unless actively maintained, and maintenance requires repetition. This would not be the last meeting at altitude. It would be a reference point, a benchmark against which the next encounter would be judged more closely, because precedent is powerful in war, especially the kind that happens without explosions. For viewers, this would be distilled into a sentence, a clip, a still image, but for planners it informed posture, fuel loads, patrol timing, and contingency ladders. The encounter proved that control was still possible, which meant the next test would likely come sooner, not later. In modern conflict, restraint invites probing, because it reveals discipline, and discipline invites challenge. The pilots returned with nothing dramatic to show, yet what they carried mattered, proof that escalation is not inevitable, that skill can hold the line even when pressure builds. At 11,000 feet nothing changed, and that was the change. Everything depended on moving forward. What came next unfolded away from cameras and headlines, because restraint does not announce itself loudly. It works in silence, shaping decisions that appear mundane on the surface. Patrol schedules were adjusted by minutes, not hours. Fuel calculations tweaked, routes nudged east or west, just enough to signal awareness without provocation. Each side reviewed cockpit footage frame by frame, studying posture, throttle changes the exact moment eyes met. Through canopies, these details mattered because modern air conflict is about reading intent early before momentum hardens into inevitability. The lesson drawn was not victory or defeat, but calibration, a reminder that the margin still existed and could be managed if discipline held. For Ukrainian planners, the encounter reinforced a delicate balance. Presence had to be maintained to deny normalization of encroachment, yet escalation had to be avoided because resources were finite and priorities elsewhere demanded attention. The Air Force could not afford symbolic gestures that burned readiness for optics. Instead, every sortie had to earn its place by gathering information, reassuring allies, and reminding opponents that access was contested. The pilots who flew that day became reference points, quiet examples of how to hold ground without crossing lines. Their debriefs focused less on adrenaline and more on breathing, tempo, discipline, and how to avoid fixation when another aircraft fills the windscreen. These human details are often ignored, but they determine outcomes when machines perform exactly as designed. On the Russian side, the calculus was equally constrained. Demonstrating reach served domestic narratives and external signaling, but accidental escalation carried costs that planners understood all too well. Airspace incidents are uniquely dangerous because reaction times are short and reversals difficult. Once a radar locks or a missile seeker warms intent, becomes harder to deny. The fact that none of this occurred was logged as success, yet also as warning, because it proved the other side would show up and hold position without blinking. That knowledge shapes future probes, making them subtler, more frequent, more reliant on ambiguity rather than force. Ambiguity is cheaper, safer, and often more effective in wearing down boundaries over time. For the pilots themselves, the encounter lingered as a memory stripped of drama. They returned to routine flight simulators, briefings, meals, sleep, yet the image of another jet sliding past at equal altitude remained vivid because it represented the thinness of the line they operate on. Training prepares them for combat, but professionalism prepares them for restraint, and restraint requires confidence that the system behind them will not demand rash proof of resolve. In that moment, both pilots trusted that silence would be understood correctly, that holding course would be read as control, not weakness, that trust is fragile, built over years, and easily broken by rhetoric far removed from cockpits. As days passed, analysts integrated the data into broader assessments, looking for patterns across domains, naval movements, electronic activity, information campaigns. The encounter at 11,000 feet became a data point among many, yet it carried symbolic weight because it showed how modern conflict breathes through thresholds rather than lines. Battles are fought without contact, victories claimed without explosions, losses incurred in credibility rather than territory. In this environment, the most dangerous moments are the quiet ones, when nothing seems to happen because decisions are being made without noise, without public scrutiny, without easy correction. Eventually another patrol would fly, and another meeting might occur, closer or farther, higher or lower. Each would test the same principles again. Are the rules still accepted? Does discipline hold? Does silence still communicate restraint? The answer is never permanent. It must be reaffirmed repeatedly by humans inside machines moving faster than thought, guided by training and judgment. The night those jets passed each other, nothing exploded. Nothing burned, yet the outcome mattered because it proved that even under pressure, choice still exists in wars defined by technology. The human decision to hold steady remains decisive, and at 11,000 feet that choice carried forward, shaping what came next, unseen but enduring.